Dear ministers, dear representatives of the EU institutions, distinguished guests. First, I would like to warmly welcome you all here at the Federation of Enterprises in Belgium on behalf of our three organizations, the Spanish Confederation of Employers Organization, the Confederation of Swedish Enterprises, and the FEB, the Federation of Enterprises of Belgium. My name is Peter Timmermans, and I'm the CEO of the FEB, the host of today. Ladies and gentlemen, today is, in my opinion, is a very important moment. It is not every day that Sweden, Spain, and Belgium come together to talk about trade. And today, we as business and employers organizations, we want to show that we stand fully united here. Our three organizations pursue the same goal namely to make EU's trade agenda bloom. And we think that the EU's trade agenda should be a clear priority for Europe and for the current and upcoming presidencies of the Council of the EU. And by organizing this common event, we hope to inspire our governments and to set the tone for a European trade policy. Besides, this morning we had a debate intra-Belgium with only the Belgian representatives of Parliament, and I can tell you it was a very animated debate between the different political parties. So we are extremely honored to welcome here the three representatives of the current and upcoming presidencies. Thank you, Mr. Jevrel and Ms. Mendez Bertolo, the Swedish and Spanish State Secretaries for Trade, respectively, together with the Belgian Permanent Representative to the European Union, Mr. Willem van der Voorde. Thank you for being here with us today. And we are looking forward to hear what the presidencies are doing to bring European trade policy to the forefront again. Ladies and gentlemen, an ambitious European trade policy is more than ever a necessity. The Russian invasion of Ukraine increased political tensions, also Brexit and the COVID-19 pandemic have showed us how important an open EU trade policy is for strengthening the EU's long-term competitiveness. And these days an increasing proportion of global growth takes place outside Europe. Everybody knows that. And diversification of trade and better access to global markets are essential for enabling European companies to access expertise, key technologies, and global value chains. And more so, they strengthen our economic resilience, represent a crucial enabler for the necessary green and digital transition. Ladies and gentlemen, besides the representatives of Sweden, Spain, and Belgium, the voice of the European Commission and the European Parliament can, of course, not be missing for an event on the EU trade agenda. We are therefore extremely grateful that Mr. Lange, Chair of the International Trade Committee of the European Parliament, and Mrs. Martin Pratt, Deputy Director at DG Trade in the European Commission, are here with us today also. And we are indeed interested to hear what we can expect from the European Commission in the next months to make European trade policy stronger and to ensure that our companies can operate in a fair, level playing field. And on the other hand, the European Parliament has an incredible influence over the EU's trade policy. And the last years, the Parliament has sometimes had a rather critical attitude about international trade and has demonstrated some resistance sometimes to open trade. So we are interested to know what's the position of the Parliament, what are the vision of the European Parliament, and what will they do in the next upcoming 12 months until the elections of June next year. And finally, we are also delighted to have Mrs. Luisa Santos here, probably very well known in our midst. She is very well known and also on a political level, I think she is very well known. Ms. Luisa Santos, Deputy Director General at our umbrella organization, Business Europe, and head of the International Affairs Department, to tell us, and we hope you can tell us a little bit more about what companies need and what they expect from the European trade policy. Let me conclude, ladies and gentlemen. I'm extremely thrilled to have representatives from all key players here around the table to exchange views on how to steer European trade policy in the right direction, as we are convinced that the three institutions, the Council, the Parliament, and the European Commission, should work hand in hand to ensure trade policy works for our companies and for our citizens. With 1 year to go until the European elections, we think it's a good moment to do some stock taking and to have a debate between all the participants here in this room. Because in my opinion, there is one certitude, no international trade means no prosperity. And on this note, I would like now hand over to Anna Stellinger. Anna Stellinger, Deputy Director General and Head of International and EU Affairs at the Confederation of Swedish Enterprise, who will moderate this debate. She said she had a CV of more than 2 pages.
That you have to read out loud.
And I have to read it out now, but I said, no, we won't do that, Anna.
I will read yours.
Yeah, that's a short one, a half a page. So you have the floor now.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you, Peter Timmermans. Thank you very much, and let me extend the thank you to the wonderful cooperation between our organization, the FAB and the CEOE. We are very happy to organize this together, us 3 business organizations with our countries holding the current and the upcoming presidencies. Now, I have been given the honor to moderate these discussions, which will be quite a challenge, because we have a short period of time and we have an absolutely fabulous roundup of speakers. So rather than long speeches, we will have short introductory remarks with then some interactions and follow-up questions. Our afternoon will be divided into 3 parts. First, a panel where I will ask the European Commission, the European Parliament, and our business organization, Business Europe, up on stage. And then a second panel when I will give the word to the countries holding the presidency and the upcoming presidencies, namely, of course, Sweden, Spain, and Belgium. And then finally, at the end, I will ask everybody up on stage for a Q&A with the audience. And since we do have audience also online, don't hesitate to write questions in the chat function. So I will dig into the seminar immediately, without losing any time. And I will ask, here I have you, Maria Martin Pratt, to join me on stage. And if you like, you can already join the podium if you wish to. But I will also ask Mr. Bernd Lange, Chair of INTA Committee, European Parliament, to come and sit with me, and Luisa Santos, Deputy Director General of Business Europe, to have a seat. And Maria Martin Pratt, I apologize, but you will have the completely impossible mission to summarize the state of play in EU trade policy from the view of the Commission in 6 minutes. But if anyone can do that, I am sure it will be you. So over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have the advantage of coming from the south of Spain that gives us the possibility to speak at the speed that people highly ever match. And I've also been given a very helpful hand by the introductory remarks of Mr. Timmermans, because he has made a number of the points I wanted to make as well, in terms of the challenge of the current context, not only because of the situation with the Ukraine, the challenges of the economy and climate change, but also the geopolitical tensions, including the competition between the US and China. And indeed, trade plays a role at a time where we need economic growth, and economic growth is going to be happening mostly outside of the European Union. And this is something that it's now increasingly being discussed, and I think it's very important that it's discussed. The increasing fragmentation is going to take a toll in our economies. The IMF has been now very active, reminding us as to possible estimates that go up to between 5 and 7% reduction of global output in the long term. And this is a risk that is not even for all countries, and the European Union is among those regions of the world that is more vulnerable. And this is normal. We are a very open economy. We trade most with the rest of the world than, for instance, the US or China. We are the world's first investor abroad, and we are the first destination of foreign direct investments. So for us, the cost of the fragmentation of the economy is going to be higher than for others. And that's why trade has a role to play, as I was saying, in terms of support for growth, to make our economies more competitive, but also, and again, this is an issue that is increasingly discussed, to make our supply chains more resilient. We need to diversify. We need to diversify in particular matters such as critical raw materials, green energy related technologies. These are important concerns at the moment, and trade is there also to play a role. And finally, trade policy has always been and will always continue to be a geopolitical tool. It is a tool that gets us closer to other countries. You engage with other countries beyond the trading and the investment. And at a time where geopolitics are playing the role that are playing, this is very important for us. Now, with that need in front of us and being at the end of an institutional cycle, what can trade at European level do in the coming months? We are lucky, and obviously I need to say that, to be with three very competent presidents that are going to come. Well, one is already there, and then the next two ones, Spain and Belgium, coming. So they will have to be part of our last run until the elections of the European Parliament and the change of presidency. Three big areas. Multilateral. We will never stop to remind everybody how important it is to keep working for the reform of the WTO. And there we're going to be quite quickly getting into the preparations of the next ministerial conference, MC13. We do need to make an effort. The WTO is not just an idea. It's not just an institution that if it stops, nothing happens. We trade, most of our trade is done on the basis of tariffs which are committed in the WTO. The WTO is also the guardrail to try to continue to have a rules-based trade system. So in that respect, we will put a lot of effort and will be one of the big priorities between now and the end of this commission. On the bilateral front, where enormous amount of work has been put, and as we approach the end of the institutional cycle, we want to redouble efforts to deliver. Here, obviously, I should start with Latin America, approaching the Spanish presidency, and within Latin America, with the agreement that from a geopolitical, economic, and environmental point of view is the most significant, that's Mercosur. Is a difficult situation. We all know that. It's a complex relation, but we believe that we can use the opportunity, including with the EU Latin America Summit in July, to give a push and try to get closer to concluding what is a project that has been long-standing and now ready to really get us into an agreement with an extremely important and big part of the world. We will also aim at signing the negotiations at the FTA that we have already concluded with New Zealand, Chile, and hopefully also Mexico. And we are progressing as fast as we can with Australia, where our target is to conclude the FTA negotiations by the summer, and with Kenya, where our target is to conclude the bilateral application of a pre-existing economic partnership agreement, hopefully as well before the summer. We are also negotiating with India and with Indonesia. Their situation is more uncertain, and there is a strong political will to advance, but this needs to be translated then on the ground. So in that respect, the more I can hope for is progress, and we are mindful as well that there are political constraints on their part in terms of election comings in those countries as well next year. And we will start, but this is only the start, with the relaunch of negotiations with Thailand and probably also with Malaysia, as we announced in March. Now, I've gone very quickly. I don't want you to think that in each of these cases, I'm talking about the same type of relation, the same type of FTA. These are different countries. One size does not fit all. And this is something that is very important for everybody, our member states and the European Parliament included, to understand. There's another point that I need to very quickly mention. It might not be in your radar, but it's extremely important. We were discussing it yesterday at the European Parliament. We need to conclude the negotiations for a new regulation on the general scheme of preferences. Many of you don't probably think about it much. It underpins our trading with 60 countries in the world, equal to 2 billion people among the countries which are the most poor. But it is important also for your economies. We are negotiating with the Parliament. We are not having this negotiation. We have to be able to conclude this within the Swedish presidency. Now, FTAs are not the only thing we are doing. You know, we are very much engaged on all the forms of cooperation which are increasingly important these days. The TTC with the United States receives a lot of attention, the Trade and Technology Council with the US, and we have also launched a Trade and Technology Council discussion with India, and we are also now launching discussions on digital trade agreements and sustainable investment facilitation agreements. Happy to get into details during the discussion. What I'm trying to say is, as what I was saying before, there are other ways to engage with countries that are not always necessarily based in a big free trade agreement. We need to manage important trade and investment relations, even if we do not have such agreements in place. The US is one, China is the other. You heard us talking about de-risking, not decoupling, but this needs now to be put into practice. And that leads me to the last part, which is trade can thrive if there is fairness. And the level playing field is also a very important part of the work we're doing. We are now working to make operational the foreign subsidies regulation, the international procurement instrument. We hope to get the anti-corruption instruments to the finishing line. It's all in the hands of the Parliament and the Council. And as you may have heard as well, we are reflecting how to further have a strategy that ensures our economic security while keeping and supporting a rules-based order and engaging with partners across the world. And that is the announced economic security strategy that we will come up with on the 21st of June. I stop here.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria Martin Pratt, for doing for managing the almost impossible task of setting the scene with a rather broad view on trade policy during the year and the years to come. Now, Mr. Bernd Lange, Chair, INTA Committee, European Parliament, these are very busy days, and we are extremely grateful that you find the time to join us in this seminar. Now, of course, the European Parliament, we all know that, is hugely key and instrumental when it comes to trade policy. But we will have European elections soon coming up. What do you see will be possible in the field of trade until the European Parliament starts slowing down until the elections?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation, and thanks a lot for the question. First of all, the Parliament is not critical. It's, let's say, modern, that trade policy is even more than just tariffs. And the integrated view on trade policy, I guess, is a clear approach by the European Parliament. And it's clear we have a fragmentation of globalization, so the Washington consensus is gone, and the system one fits all is also over. So we have really to look how to go ahead with trade policy, and specifically also until the 9th of June next year, when the European election will take. First principle, really in line with Maria Pratt, the de-risking. We want to stabilize supply chain, make them more resilient, more transparent, and this has to be reflected in the trade policy, specifically in the next year. Secondly, sustainability. We want that the people on the ground really benefiting from trade policy. Therefore, trade policy is more than looking just to tariffs. Fourthly, we need more clear rules for the digital trade, the e-commerce, the digital space, the question of data flow, of data localization is important. And fourthly, transparency and democratic involvement is also important to not lose support. So therefore, we need the 4 levels. One was mentioned by Maria Pratt. We are looking, of course, to the WTO. To be honest, I'm not so optimistic that there will be really the necessary modernization of WTO and the addition to the rule book happen in the next MC 13 in February next year. So this will be perhaps not the top priority for the next year. Secondly, the bilateral field, yes, top priority, and I'm pushing very hard that we are going ahead with the agreement with Chile, which is really respecting the 4 principles with Mexico. I hope we can get the go from the president quite soon with New Zealand, and I hope that we conclude the Australian agreement also. And my clear goal is to ratify this in this legislative term. So quite ambitious, but I'm working on that.
Yes.
And also the council could really go a little bit more quicker in translation and legal scrubbing. And of course, the negotiation on an additional protocol for the Mercosur agreement are going as well. And we want to make the stamp on it during this year as well. So having
During this year or parliamentary year?
this year,
This year. Fabulous.
stamp up. And then of
Perfect.
course
You have a huge amount of witnesses in the room.
And this is really the network of bilateral agreement with reliable partner. I would really say reliable partner and not like-minded partner. That's also a clear message. Third element, the unilateral legislation. As you know, we have perhaps not liked by everybody the due diligence regarding sustainability, the forced labor legislation, but also the anti-coercion, the IPI, the foreign subsidies, really to make the possibilities to act as a European Union much stronger. And Maria, you mentioned the GSP, the preference for the developing world, and I will mention this as well. It's a unilateral legislation to give economic empowerment to 65 countries worldwide in partnership. And I think we should not misuse this as a migration instrument to have a conditionality for readmission to citizens. This is a really conflictual point. It's a trade instrument, not a migration instrument. And fourthly, we want also to link trade policy with industrial policy. I guess we have the wake-up call by the war by China activities and by the Inflation Reduction Act. And we need really to fine-tune the relation between trade policy and industrial policy. We are just today in my committee a hearing on that. So these are the priorities. Hopefully we can get it until the 9th of June.
Wonderful. I think it's absolutely fabulous to hear the chair of the INTA committee with such ambitious goals. Thank you very much, Mr. Lange. And I will pass on the word not to an EU institution, but almost Business Europe. And I was about to say Luisa Santos, because you're almost an institution yourself. Everybody knows you in trade. Now we know what the European Commission is looking forward to and what the European Parliament is looking forward to. But trade is not done by institutions or countries. Trade is done by companies and businesses. So we would very much like to hear from you also out of this palette or this smorgasbord, if you wish. What are the bits and pieces that you would like from a business perspective see happen up until the elections 2024?
Thanks, Anna, and good afternoon to everyone. I hope you're having fun for lunch, because it's still lunchtime. Now, from the business side, it's all about competitiveness. Why? Because we have an environment that, apart from becoming very tense from a geopolitical point of view, more fragmented, but also more competitive. And this means that a lot of governments around the world are proactively and sometimes very aggressively supporting their industries. And this means that, of course, competition is increasing. Competition was already there, but now when you have countries, not only China, because China has been doing this for many, many years, but when you have countries like the US very aggressively, very proactively, with very clear industrial policy goals, together with subsidies or forms of support to the companies, this means that, of course, competition is becoming stronger and sometimes not so leveled and so not so fair. So this is the setup we have as business. So what do we need in terms of trade policy? Well, we need two things. First, we need markets. And I think this is very important, both in terms of imports as well as exports. Imports, because of course, costs are increasing. And we know how inflation is, of course, impacting the citizens, but is also impacting the companies. Energy costs, still high, even if they are going down, but also other costs have been piling up. And this, of course, has been having an impact also on the companies. Many companies are absorbing costs not to pass them to their customers, but at one point we will see it more and more. So we need to have access to imports as well, and to have access at imports at competitive prices. And this is not just raw materials, it's many other goods that we are not producing any longer in Europe, and we need to have them, and we need to have them at better conditions. Then we need exports. I mean, we are doing a lot of efforts to transform our industry, to invest in decarbonization, to invest in digitalization. This is not just for Europe. This needs to be for the world. This means that we also need to have better access to many markets around the world, both developed and developing, to also be able to export these green technologies, these green goods. It's good for us from an economic point of view, but it's also good for the planet and for many of these countries that this way could have access, easier access to these technologies and these goods. Then we need rules. So we need markets, we need rules. As I said, competition is increasing, not always fair. Is the WTO the answer? Well, it has not been the answer in the last years, but we need to believe it can still be the answer. But in the meantime, we have alternatives. Of course, we have our unilateral niche alternatives in the meantime. We agree, Bernd, but we need alternatives in the meantime also to help the process in the WTO. And the alternatives are, of course, the unilateral instruments that we have that are important, but also what we can do bilaterally. And this is our trade agreements, critical raw materials partnerships, the digital agreements. That's how we also promote new rules, and we also build up possibly a consensus that will help the WTO move forward. And of course, final point, US and China. Not easy to be in the middle between the two. One important thing is companies are very keen and very interested to mitigate risk and de-risk. But in this process, governments need to listen to business. What we cannot have is more export restrictions, is solutions on investment that will restrict investment both inbound and outbound without a proper consultation of business. So a word of caution here. We are part and ready to commit and be involved in the process. Don't do that without us.
Thank you, Luisa, for a very clear message. I hope this microphone is working because I would like to get back to you, Maria Martin Pratt. If not, perhaps you can borrow the one from Luisa, but I would like to get back to something you said about the importance of multilateralism. And I think many of us in this room would agree that we have all said that multilateralism and WTO is plan A, because any kind of achievement in the multilateral world with 164 countries makes it so much easier for trade and for business. But then we heard also Mr. Bernd Lange saying that he's not hoping for much when it comes to the WTO, and Luisa Santos speaking about alternatives, which gives quite a gloomy picture. What do you think, or what do you hope? Perhaps those things are not the same. What do you hope and what do you think can be achieved at the Ministerial Conference 13, MC 13 in Abu Dhabi?
One issue before I reply to
Does it work?
that,
Michael?
it works, yes.
No.
Before getting into the specific as to what to expect from the ministerial conference next year in Abu Dhabi, when it is clear we need a reform of multilateralism, this is not only in the WTO, let's be clear. The multilateral world that was established after 1945 was based on a premise that doesn't exist anymore. And the weight of countries today, such as India, Brazil, or South Africa, need to be taken into account. For as long as we continue to think that a G7 or a G7 plus can establish the rules that will be followed by the rest of the world, we are not going to be able to go back to multilateralism. And again, even if the WTO has not produced big agreements in the last years, it has continued to maintain rules. It has problems with dispute resolution, but we have tried to find as well interim solutions to it. It continues to be the base on which we rely for many of our trade relations. So now, I think we need to be realistic in terms of not all the challenges can be solved between now and MC13. I think we see MC13 more like a step towards a reform that needs to take place in MC14. And it has to be a reform that comprises the disputes settlement function, but it also comprises the negotiating function and also the issues that are discussed and part of WTO. We need to have environment and trade. We need to have industrial policy and trade. And we need to discuss as well with a number of very important countries, many of them developing countries, how they see trade helping their industrialization. For as long as we don't do that, they are not going to be with us. Obviously, it will also be very important to have the US fully involved in this process.
Absolutely, which is not an easy task. Mr. Lange, you gave a quite ambitious overview of what you want to achieve, not only until the elections, but this year, 2023. I would like to ask you, what do you see as the main obstacles or hurdles for this ambitious trade agenda?
First of all, I guess the mindset has really changed. This criticism you played with, of course, was there. But regarding the global situation, I guess it has really changed. And therefore, in the parliament is a clear mood that we're going ahead with this agenda. One obstacle is, of course, the council and Liberty Commission, because
But three representatives of the obstacles are here, at least.
Because it takes 1 year after a signature of an agreement until until the end of the negotiation to the signature. So Chile, we concluded in November last year, and it will appear November this year. This is a crazy situation. Translation is one thing. I guess it's more or less a standard agreement. You can have some elements from
Change
previous,
Mexico from Chile.
exactly, in a lot of parts of the agreement, and the legal scrapping. It should not take 4 months. So let's really push. And once again, the 4 agreements should be ready for the ratification, and we take, if we are really working hard and quick, 3 months. So if we have the text at the end of the day of this year on the table, it will happen. So it is not unrealistic. And on the WTO front, I guess Maria mentioned the right point. So we will perhaps reach some slight progress with some bilateral agreements in MC 13 if all members are agreeing. This is not...
if all the stars are aligned.
Exactly on board, specifically also our American friends. On the unilateral front, we finished a lot of legislation. the question of due diligence on forced labor and GSP will be finished this year, I'm sure. So it's really a realistic trade agenda.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Lange. And Luisa Santos, we heard Maria Martin Pratt talk about supply chains and the difficulties. We have heard Mr. Lange talk about de-risking and also securitizing our supply chains. Now, we hear a lot of buzzwords: reshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring. The imagination is almost unlimited. But what is the reality of European businesses? What is happening in the real business world when it comes to supply chains now? Are we all reshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring?
No, absolutely not. I think what is happening is, of course, several things. First, people are getting sometimes closer to the markets precisely because of security reasons. So partners that are, for obvious reasons, to consider to be more risky, and here, let's name it, is China, for all the measures that the US is adopting and all the measures we are also considering possibly to adopt. It is becoming more and more difficult to produce in China, invest in China, and serve the world from China. This does not mean that we will not continue to invest and produce in China to serve China. So that's one thing. The other thing is, of course, because of a lot of industrial policy measures that many countries around the world are taking, you will have a lot of investments in these countries, and one clear is the US. Will this change significantly the way supply chains are organized? Maybe in some key areas, if we have more local content requirements, because that's the other problem. Once you have more and more forced localization, local content requirements to be able to have access to certain subsidies or certain tax credits, of course, that is an inflection point in terms of supply chains. So this is something we need to see in terms of trend, but it is a worrying trend because this will definitely lead to more fragmentation. Then in terms of security, we are all very keen to the risk. This opens opportunities for many more countries to attract investments and attract trade. We have a clear example that Vietnam is benefiting a lot from the very difficult situation between the US and China. So there are countries in Asia, but also in Latin America, that could benefit from this de-risking. And that's why I come back to the fact that we need the proper framework, we need the deals to give legal certainty also to business, that it is worth investing in these countries and that this is a long-term project. So there will be production to Europe, closer to Europe, but this is not going to be the absolute trend. We will see other trends as well.
Thank you very much, Luisa. And I would like to suggest a warm applause to Maria Martin Pratt, Luisa Santos, and Bernd Lange. I will ask you to have a seat. And I will ask you to come back for the final Q&A session. Now it's time to hear from the representatives of the three countries holding and upcoming holding in the future, the EU presidency. It's the Swedish EU presidencies. I'm thinking too much of Sweden. Anyhow, I am very happy to have the Swedish State Secretary for Trade, Håkan Jevrell, with us. Please come up and have a seat. We also have Ms. Siana Mendes Bertolo with us, State Secretary from Spain, and from Belgium. Please have a seat. We're very happy to have EU Ambassador, Mr. William van der Voorde. Welcome to all three of you. And this is not from some kind of a nationalistic nepotism, but I will start by giving the word to our Swedish representative here. We are currently holding the EU presidency. Only a few weeks back. You don't look too tired.
Still alive?
Still
Absolutely.
alive?
Yeah, for sure.
Perfect. We're very happy that you're here, Håkan Jevrell. And I would like to ask you two questions to start off with. What, in your mind, has the Swedish EU presidency achieved so far in the field of trade? And then secondly, What are you expecting from is it 4 or 5 weeks left of the presidency?
Yeah, start with the last one. Everything will be solved, of course. And
Perfect. And everything Mr. Lange wants for 2023, you would do before the 1st of July, right?
it will be a journey. Yeah,
It will be
for
a
sure.
journey.
No, but thank you so much. Truly a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for coming here. Very important topics that we discuss, and I think that we got a very interesting and broad overview on what's going on and some of the obstacles that we see ahead. I must say, I took office on the 21st of October. I have a background of 7 years in Asia as a Swedish ambassador, and from that perspective, which really colors my daily life, and actually coincides quite well with the Swedish view on things, in a sense, is that the world is running very, very fast. Development is, the growth is very much outside of the European Union, so we have to really consider that. And then, of course, which was mentioned here several times, that we're talking about geopolitics now to a much greater extent than we used to, and we really have to consider these elements in all we do. And I think that has also truly colored the Swedish presidency from the perspective of seeing how can we be able to have a long-term perspective of making European Union and of course what is most important, European Union companies relevant and competitive for the future. So this is then we talk about broader perspective of competitiveness and how we feel skilled talent, researchers and everything. But let me also, which I think is important to say, that the geopolitical situation now with what's happening in Ukraine is truly. I mean, how can we accept the fact that we have war in Europe? And it is a fact, and it will color all our policies for many years to come. And I think we should not forget when we talk about trade policy and we see the geopolitics of China, US, and so on. US is crucial for European security, and I think we should not forget that the massive support that has been given from the US to Ukraine is very important. So even though we have our obstacles, the transatlantic link will continue to be extremely important. So in this regard, from what we feel, what have we achieved? I think it's a bit tricky to say what have we achieved. I mean, these are long-term processes, and we heard from the Commission on how things have been working out. But of course, from our perspective, the free trade agreements is actually very crucial for us to give our companies a more level playing field for the future in growth areas. So I won't mention all the free trade agreements, even though I think it's very important that we keep this high on the agenda. We're of course also proud to see that we managed to arrange the EU Indo-Pacific Ministerial Forum a couple of weeks ago. I think that's an important signal to that part of the world that when we talk about our industry policies, it doesn't mean that we are shoring all the supply chains back to Europe. We are diversifying our supply chains among friends, and they are inside the EU, of course, we're all friends, but also with friends outside the EU, and Asia is a big part of that. So all the free trade agreements that we really can move forward on this is of highest importance. From the president perspective also, of course, that we have managed to keep the strong support for Ukraine. We keep the EU united. I think that is highly important. And then moving on to the very important task of how can we, having said that US is our very close ally and friend, we also need to manage the EU-US relationship, and we have put a lot of efforts into that, and we're looking forward to the TTC now to see if we can be part of some movement in coming over some of the obstacles that we have seen in our trade relations in this part. Should also mention that from our perspective, we're very happy to see that we've managed to see the anti-coercion instrument. It was not so easy for Sweden in all parts. But having said that, we are there and it's in place. And then, of course, we look forward to the GSP to really come true. WTO, of course, is something that we always keep high on the agenda, and we need to address that. If I just one word about the future, I think it's what we have really talked about, the EU competitiveness. I mean, if you look at the EU share of global GDP, year 2000, it was 20%, now it's 15%. This is a sign that all the member states have to address. We're talking about research, how to bring out innovation in all countries is of the highest importance if we are to stay relevant for the future. All these sort of challenges that are not, of course, not only controlled on a European Union level, it's a strong commitment from the member states. But I think we really need to push that further.
Thank you very much, Håkan Jevrell. Thank you also for bringing competitiveness once again on the table. We heard it in the previous panel as well, and I think it's in place to congratulate both the Swedish presidency and the European Commission for putting a competitiveness agenda on the table during this presidency. Now, Siana Mendes Bertolo, you are the State Secretary, the Spanish State Secretary for Trade. I think it should be functioning. Your country will be taking over the EU presidency in, 5 weeks. What will your main priorities be during this autumn? And what can you expect during your period as the president of the EU Council?
Well, thank you, Anna. And first of all, I would like also to thank the confederations, the CEOE and the FEB, and also the Swedish Enterprise Confederation for organizing this event, which I think it's very interesting as to see how aligned we are, the three presidencies, in terms of the trade policy agenda. These are very complex times. It is true. Well, Maria has mentioned not only the war, but the geopolitical tension. So it's a challenging presidency. At the same time, it is also very encouraging and exciting to make important progresses. But as my colleague just said, all the hard work has already been done, right?
Perfect.
So it's just finalizing the files. Well, there's a lot of hard work coming. But I, of course, want to congratulate you and to thank for all the effort that you've made during this first semester of 2023. We will resume all your legacy in 5 weeks and favoring, of course, continuity, because we are very much aligned in the two fundamental principles of trade policy. First of all, not renouncing to economic openness, and second, supporting multilateral architecture and multilateralism in all. So the motto will be open strategic autonomy, as we will go on working in identifying vulnerabilities, dependencies, interdependencies, and at the same time trying to elaborate and design mechanisms to mitigate those vulnerabilities. But one of those mechanisms, of course, is diversification. And Luisa talked about it before, and we are totally we agree totally with that. Diversification is also the core, at the core of trade policy in the EU. So the priority will be for the semester to make important progresses on negotiations and the approval also of very important free trade agreements, association agreements, modernization of the agreement with Mexico, the one with Chile,
Mercosur?
and of course the Mercosur, of course. The additional instrument, we are waiting for the final proposal for it to materialize, and we expect that during the first semester we will have good news on that. So I really appreciate your comment, Bernd, because it will be great if by the end of the year 2023 we can get that agreement to to finalize and have and be passed really. Apart from Latin America, which of course we will put it at the top of the priorities for the trade policy agenda, and then we will start in July with the EU CELAC Summit, which will be a very important event, and not only to talk about trade policy, of course, but cooperation and politics in all, and alliances. We will also make progresses on other negotiations that were just mentioned before. Well, the New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, first of all, will be finalized thanks to your work by the beginning of the semester. That will be great. But then Australia, Indonesia, India, Thailand, I see at very different stages, really, of negotiation. But I mean, the Commission will have also our support to go on with the mandate and try also to make progresses on that. And then transatlantic relationship with the US, the most important one, we know it. It is not always easy, but we'll try to build up this constructive agenda, again, trying to negotiate mechanisms together on technology, also on trade, critical materials, and trying to look for joint solutions to global challenges such as climate change, ecological transition, digitalization. We have to look for joint solutions. And if the United States sometimes forgets it, we have to remind them that we need to find joint solutions. And then, finally, China, a strategic partner and also a systemic rival. So trying to promote level playing fields, trying to find through unilateral mechanisms sometimes, and sometimes with agreements, a way to set the level playing field that is fair for our companies, equal conditions. I think it's also something that we must work on. And last but not least, even though the ministerial conference will be held during your presidency in Abu Dhabi in 2024, we will have to work also with the Commission on defining priorities for us, maybe fisheries, agriculture and food security, food safety. So I think that we will be very busy.
Thank you, Sienna. And now, Mr. Willem van der Voorde, Belgian ambassador to the EU. Now, you will be facing the EU presidency in spring 2024, which is, I guess, quite an interesting and challenging period for you, because there will not only be the European elections, but also elections in your country. So I guess it will be a tricky task for the presidency. A few words on the priorities that you believe will be the Belgium priorities in the field of trade.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anna, and dear participants in this nice exchange. Well, as you said correctly, we come at the end of the long row of presidencies, at the end of a legislative term. So the table is full and is gradually being cleared. And so we are very grateful to our predecessors, to the Swedish presidency, the Spanish presidency. But of course, there will be issues left. It is unavoidable. The agenda overall is very ambitious, and we shall do whatever we can to bring the important projects which we share and to bring them to a good end. To be a bit more concrete, for instance, you mentioned, Gianna, the MC13 in Abu Dhabi. Indeed, the preparations are starting already almost now in the autumns under your presidency. It will be up to us to organize a meaningful presence, a massive presence even, of the European Union at the conference. We will have to work at a consensus, help to work at a consensus. I wouldn't, we know the situation is difficult with the WTO, but I wouldn't be too desperate. Last year we heard the same story for the MC12 in Geneva. And at the end of the day, during these days of negotiation, I was also part there a couple of days, we could harvest some interesting results. I mean, it was not a complete overhaul, but so there is no reason to be too pessimistic neither, because probably the larger world community has understood that we have to win something with a reinforcement of the multilateral system that awareness is a bit different from country to country, but overall, in the past years, we may, despite some fragmentation, believe that the meaning of constructive cooperation is understood as a win-win for everybody. And at least we in the European Union, we are fully behind that. Also Belgium, we have a strong tradition of supporting multilateral cooperation. So we should try to do whatever we can there. And then it was also mentioned, the TTC, also very important to keep that young tradition intact and lively. Next week we have the 6th edition in Sweden. Then I think usually the second TTC in the year is then taking place in the United States. And then next year, in the first half of 2024, it will be to Belgium to host here the next next in the cycle. And good, we shall see how it evolves. It is a challenging format. It is a rich format with very broad and interesting issues in matters of trade, of technology, which are a good expression also of the new variety of tools we are looking for. So you have the well-known tool of the bilateral trade agreements, but we have now more diversified instruments. You have even clubs which are emerging, like the Critical Raw Materials Club. But the TTC is also an interesting new format to which we will try to contribute as much as possible. And then, of course, it was also mentioned, and we'll not go deeper into detail, so we have the bilateral trade agreements, which are now, some are more advanced than others have advanced. We shall have to see and wait a little bit further on how the presidencies before us advance, but we hope to do whatever we can to use also the time which is left, a short time frame which is left for dialogue with the European Parliament, wherever needed. We will use that very well to finish the trade ambition, trade agenda, which is ambitious, but which we entirely share.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I would like to ask a few follow-up questions because the US, of course, has been mentioned quite a lot. We haven't been speaking that much about the Inflation Reduction Act, but it's there in the background. And Håkan Jevrell, there will be the TTC4 meeting in Luleå, wonderful Luleå, Tuesday, Wednesday next week. And of course, that's not an EU presidency task to organize. It's between the EU and the US. But still, the presidency is quite instrumental, and we will be hosting the delegations in Sweden. Why is it so important that we succeed with the TTC, and what are your expectations from the Swedish government?
Thank you so much. I think it's going to be extremely interesting. It's very far north, so the sun will never set. So we'll have 48 hours meetings.
And there might be mosquitoes.
Yeah, some. No, but I think, of course, what TTC is about to actually bring US and EU closer together in vital areas is actually key to be able to keep that discussion going. Mm-hmm. Of course, the Inflation Reduction Act and the impacts of that will be there, and we will see how the Commission eventually will manage to work with the Americans on moving forward in certain of these areas. However, I do believe that it's also important to remind ourselves that the background idea of the Inflation Reduction Act is actually to bring the US into the green transition, and that means huge opportunities for many European very advanced companies to be part of that as well. So we have to work on these obstacles that are obviously there. There is a clear voice from certain part of European industry when it comes to Inflation Reduction Act, and we need to sort of muddle through in those difficult questions. However, I think from our perspective, long term, if we can come through and find sort of a level where we can agree, we then must focus on how can we work closer together of actually bringing growth not only to the EU but to US and other parts of the world.
Thank you, Håkan. And I would have a question to you also, Siana Mendes Bartolo. You speak about the free trade agreements that we want to advance, and I think that a lot of us agree in this room, and you mentioned also Mercosur, for instance. Some would say that the time is not right for free trade agreements, that we do have a public opinion against it, that there are other resistances when it comes to free trade agreements, and that we have a geopolitical situation that puts other questions more on top of the table, security, for instance, geopolitics in a broader sense. How can we make sure that free trade agreements still go ahead and still are on top of the agenda when the timing is not 100% easy?
Well, some may think that, but others may think that one of the lessons learned from the pandemic and then with the war also is that cooperative solutions are the key. Avoiding fragmentation and keeping our economies open and interdependent and cooperating. So we found that was the solution during the pandemic to get the vaccines, to get the raw materials that we needed. So why not? I mean, we need to diversify. We need to get strong, reliable allies, and because no nation can be self-sufficient, and we know that. We've been talking about it in the previous panel. I mean, no nation can be self-sufficient. We depend on others, but we need legal framework. We need multilateral operational architecture that make that works and make the framework be predictable, transparent, and fair for everyone. We have to look for shared prosperity, and that's the main goal and main objective for trade policy. So I think the time is good to talk about this, and it is sometimes difficult to communicate to specific sectors, maybe at national level. But it is our duty, our responsibility as governments to do that and to try to convince that cooperating is better than protect without caring for the others and for the partners. So I think that will be, the line that will drive our presidency together with the Commission, and that will set again the trade policy and free trade agreements as priority in the trade agenda. I wanted also to mention that sometimes, and it is a matter of concern, we lose our face and we lack some credibility when it takes really so long to negotiate and to pass and to approve their free trade agreements. So we will ask our colleagues during our presidency to go fast with legal scrubbing and translations and everything. We need to get reliability. We need to be reliable partners for other countries. They have to see us are credible allies. And for that too, we have to be proactive and we have to be efficient when we negotiate.
Thank you. And I would like to ask a question for Willem van der Volde, and perhaps if the two of you would also like to add something, because one thing that strikes me, at least when I listen to you here today, is that I have myself never heard Sweden, Spain, and Belgium being so like-minded in trade. I mean, this is really a conclusion from the discussions here today. Now, I hope you agree, Willem. How do we make use of this? Because now we have 3 presidencies, a few weeks of the Swedish, the Spanish coming along, the Belgian after that, where we seem to have the same, very similar approaches, at least, to the field of trade and trade policy. How do we make use of this? How do we leverage this?
Well, to start with, it's already good that 3 governments are on one line. But
3 out of 27.
Well, at least
it's a good start.
But another thing is, of course, public opinions, and you touched on the issue, and I think we have to be very open about it. It's a difficult issue, and also in my country, but not just in Belgium, but in several other countries, we have developed sensibilities, societal sensibilities on exchange of goods, on how to produce our industrial production apparatus, the green revolution, and the social standards which we have to upkeep in our own countries. And of course, for public opinions, we see that very clearly in Belgium. these same expectations are projected towards our trade relations in the world, because we want to keep also a level playing field in our trade relations, and that is the fairest way of increasing wealth for everybody and exchanging goods and services. So that is a challenge for us. I think as governments, we are very much aware and like-minded on the international geopolitical field, which has changed, the challenges which are before us, the partnerships which we have to develop. But we have to work together to help each other in explaining these challenges to all our citizens, because at the end of the day, and these trade agreements, when they are mixed, they're also ratified in the member states. You need to find parliamentary majorities in our member states. That is the game, and we have to respect also these rules, even when it is difficult. So, and that's as was said before, that's our job. We have to work at that. It's not easy, but that is our job, and it is. I would almost say it's never finished. It's not really true, but I mean, it is a huge challenge, and we can only be happy that at least in the last presidencies of this legislative term, we are very well aware of the need of completing this trade agenda.
Sienna, how do you want to add something on this? The stars aligned being being aligned.
Yeah, I wanted to also add up that it makes it easier to tell to the public opinion that a free trade agreement is good if we take into account that they have sophisticated so much that trade is not only about export and import, but it's about sharing standards. It's about SMEs, or the gender perspective is also about creating employment, of course.
Absolutely.
Maintaining the standards in the environmental and social level. So it's trade and sustainability, and that is very important because it answers or it responds to a demand, a requirement by the public opinion in very recent years, and that's why it is so hard now to negotiate free trade agreements, because they are so comprehensive and ambitious, which is good, that it is not so easy to get there. But I mean, I think it's important to tell the whole story. It's not just economics, it's not just exports and imports. It's a lot more than that, and that's why trade policy is so important.
Håkan, how do we make use of this? 3 countries aligned.
Well, great. I think it's a great opportunity to move forward. But it's also very clear, and all politics is local in a sense, and we need to keep that in mind, that all the governments have to be prepared to stand up for all the policies that we join into together. And it's far from easy, absolutely not. And I would assume that among businesses here, some are concerned about some of the rules and regulations that we set in our member states, but also on a European level is a concern. And how will that play out in sort of the local politics? I don't know. So I do agree that we have great opportunities now of actually moving further and hopefully faster as well. But on the other hand, we also have the issue of, as I mentioned earlier, the European part of global trade and global GDP is shrinking. So we must make sure that EU stays attractive, and that goes for also the single market, the importance of single market, to actually be an interesting partner to continue to deal with. And we for sure still have it. But we should keep that in mind for the future, I do believe.
Thank you. I will now ask Maria Martin Prat, Bert Lange, and Luisa Santos to join us on stage for a super efficient Q&A from the audience. And I would like to, if I were to summarize this last panel, it's amazing to see the similarities, of course, but I also take the quote that the table is full, but it will be gradually cleared. That sounds like a fantastic situation for the EU presidency. So thank you to the 3 of you, and please join us, Maria Martin Prat, Bert Lange, and Luisa Santos on stage. if you wish, we have the opportunity or the possibility to take at least one or perhaps two questions. I have one that has already been sent to me digitally, but is there somebody in the room who wants to ask a question to this fabulous panel? I can see Pascal waving the hand. If you get a microphone, my wild guess is that it will have something to do with services. It's working.
Pascal Canet from the European Services Forum. Thank you very much for this very interesting panels. You mentioned a lot, the World Trade Organization and the upcoming ministerial conference. I'm from the European Services Forum. We're very much worried about the possibility that the moratorium on custom duty on electronic transmissions might disappear, which will make that the first time the WTO, instead of getting rid of barriers, will allow the introduction of a new barriers, which would be tariff on services, which has never been seen by humanity so far. Is this going to be a priority for you? Because, of course, fisheries and agriculture and reform WTO is very important. But if the WTO is going to say to business, we will introduce new barriers, support of business might be complicated later. Thank you.
So the moratorium is not just the WTO advancing, but keeping the moratorium is actually making WTO not go in reverse. Who would like to pick up on that question? Mr. Lange, perhaps? Microphone, sorry.
Yeah, thanks. And we are fighting for that as well. So it should be not a moratorium each 2 years extended, so it should be general principle. But of course, a little bit linked to the e-commerce negotiations. So hopefully, there will be progress this year so that we can conclude it. And then the second big question is, will this be accepted by all 164 members? So there's a linkage, but we are fighting for that. This is really important for services and digital trade as well.
Does anybody want to add something? Luisa? Microphone. Sorry.
No, the only questions I wanted, the additional point, because of course this is very important for us. One important point for the competitiveness of European industry is protection and safeguarding innovation. So, of course, we need to foster innovation, and this is what we should do. But at the same time, we need to protect also that innovation. And of course, we need a moratorium, and that's critical to address the question of digital trade. But we also need to ensure that on IP, on intellectual property, at least we maintain what we have. And also here, we are under threat. So I think it's very important that we keep what we have on both on digital and as well as an IP, if we really want to have an innovative industry in Europe.
Maria Martin-Pratt.
I just wanted to add one thing on the moratorium, and is to give homework to business. You need to speak up, in particular in those countries that are going to be trying to make sure there is not an extension. And the seminal example is India.
Yep.
India, a huge software producer, huge audiovisual producer, and is still at political level playing with the idea of this being the last time there is a moratorium and doing away with it at the next ministerial. So in that respect, I think there's a lot of work for industry to do in a number of those countries.
Thank you, Maria Martin-Pratt. You're making my job so easy, because the second question that I received digitally is about India. The question is, how realistic is it to talk about a free trade agreement with India? You have mentioned it, quite a few of you. And I could add that not Mr. Lange. True. No, not this year at least. And it's true that we have always been saying, all of us, that India is the future, but then the future has always happened somewhere else. And India is notoriously difficult to negotiate with. Are we even realistic when we think about a free trade agreement with this 1.4 billion country with quite a protectionist history? You want to go? You look like you really want to say something, Håkan Juel.
No, India is extremely important for us, a huge market already, and will be increasingly so. In 2 years' time, they will have a 80% coverage for 5G in all of India. That's better than EU. So this is an economy that will grow for sure. And they are very, very well aware about their own capacity and their own sort of consumer market. I spoke
Their
to
size.
their size. I spoke to a senior advisor, and he said, you know, if you push us too hard, we have our own market, and there are other markets. So it's a very, very tricky but extremely important friend and ally for us.
Anybody wants to have a go? Sienna?
It's three different negotiations or agreements. One for the investment, the trade and the geographical indication. So maybe the geographical indications is the easiest one, but the other two, I agree with you. They are difficult, and I think that sustainability, TSD chapter, sustainable development and trade chapter will be especially difficult to negotiate with them. That is information that we got from the authorities, Indian authorities, and that is something that it really matters to us. Isn't it like that? You want to say something?
In the end, is the council, after receiving the consent from the parliament, that ratifies what we negotiate. So, at some point, the question as to how important is what, we'll get back to you.
Yes, yes. Perfect. I think that will be India concluding this discussion, showing how important trade is, but how tricky trade is also. I will hand over to Marta Blanco for some final remarks. But before that, I would like to give a warm round of applause for Luisa Santos, Maria Martin Prat, Willem van der Voorde, Sienna Bertolo Mendes Bertolo, Håkan Jevrell, and Bert Lange. Thank you. Malta.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Anna, for giving me the challenging opportunity to wrap up this meeting with some conclusions in 5-6 minutes. First of all, I think today's event, organized by Swedish Enterprise, the FEB, and the Spanish Confederation for Industries and Employers, shows our firm conviction that trade must become again a clear priority for the European Union. The current Swedish presidency and the upcoming presidencies must serve to bring a new impetus to an open trade agenda, because that will provide our companies with new opportunities and a level playing field in third markets. So the first conclusion is that open international trade is not an option. It's an absolute necessity for European companies to grow and remain technologically competitive. And we have heard some facts to support this conclusion. 85% of economic global growth is already taking place outside the European Union, and our continent is gradually losing weight in terms of GDP and population. Let me also remind you that in this respect, that more than 36 million jobs in Europe depend directly or indirectly on international trade. So I think we, the three business organizations, strongly pledge that the EU takes an offensive stance in trade policy to improve market access in third countries. And in this regard, the joint statement initiatives, the extension of the moratorium on customs duties on electronic transmissions in the WTO, and the bilateral free trade agreements under negotiation or ratification should regain the primary attention by the EU. I think bilateral free trade agreements is probably the most popular guest in this event. They become even more critical if we bear in mind the strategic dimension in the current international context of technological and economic rivalry, as they help to diversify our supply chains and enable our companies to access raw materials and intermediate goods, which are key to achieve the goals of the European Green Agenda. So the EU must extend and improve its network of trade agreements to offer companies the maximum range of choices so that they can find alternative markets and mitigate their over-dependencies in accordance with competitive criteria. More on FTAs, it has been said that free trade agreements must constitute one of the basic elements of EU's international alliances with our main trading partners, but also with countries of Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and Asia Pacific. We should provide our companies, with the necessary tools for them to make the best choices to achieve more resilient supply chains. We have mentioned COVID-19 and the brutal invasion of Ukraine by Russia that have shown that supply chains can easily be disrupted, although it is not less true that they have been able to adapt in short periods to changing circumstances. Sacrificing the flexibility of supply chains for the sake of security may have unintended consequences. So we advocate that any decision which may affect supply chains, this is said by organizations, business organizations, must take into consideration its complexity and take on board the opinion of European companies on a permanent public-private dialogue basis. I think today we have had a good example of this permanent public-private dialogue, which it's very useful. Do not lose sight of the strategic dimension of bilateral trade agreements and commit mistakes that we may regret in the future. Additionally, I would like to also mention the need to underpin that aspects related to export controls should be agreed with main partners to avoid unilateral decisions and further market fragmentation. And well, to sum up, I think we, the three business federations, consider that Swedish, Spanish, and Belgian presidencies must mark a turning point in the EU's trade policy agenda. And we say a turning point because coming from a period where the main efforts were dedicated to enhancing our trade toolbox, the European Union must now conclude the negotiations with Australia, make substantial progress in the negotiations with India and Indonesia, sorry, and conclude them if the conditions are given, reach agreements with the US on critical raw materials and on steel and aluminum. I think it was not mentioned, steel and aluminum agreement with the US, and ratify the trade agreements with Chile, Mexico, and Mercosur, and with the WTO as an overarching inspiration for all of us. So I would not like to finish my conclusions without thanking our speakers for sharing your time with us and your relevant contributions, and the audience for having attended this event. And also to the teams of our three confederations for the organization of this event. And finally, to the president of FEB, Peter Timmermans, and his team for hosting us today. Thank you very much.